The courtroom fell silent as the gavel struck, its echo slicing through the tense air like a final judgment. Emma Hayes stood frozen, breath shallow, as Judge Porter declared the verdict with a cold, unwavering tone. Jacob Miller clenched his fists, his jaw tightening as disbelief and anger rippled through him. At the far end, Laura Bennett fumbled for her phone, her trembling fingers barely able to grip it. Detective Mark Riley shifted uneasily by the door, his watchful eyes darting toward the defense table where Adrian Cole sat, still and calculating. From the gallery, a soft sob broke the silence, the sound heavy with despair. In the shadows, Vivian Cross observed every reaction, her gaze unyielding and sharp. Outside, rain battered the windows, thunder rumbling like a warning from above. Emma whispered, "This isn't justice." Jacob growled, "Then we find it ourselves." A phone rang suddenly, cutting through the silence like a blade, promising chaos to come. The storm seemed to follow Emma Hayes, as she pushed into a dark corridor, clutching her coat tightly. Jacob Miller followed, his voice low and urgent. Jacob said, "Emma, breathe, we'll find a way through this." Emma's voice was sharp, "Find a way." Adrian Cole walks free while everything we've built burns. Laura Bennett appeared at the far end, calling out softly but firmly. Laura said, "Wait, you both need to hear something." Emma halted, her pulse quickening as Detective Mark Riley emerged from a side door, his posture tense. Mark said, "We shouldn't be here. Someone in that room knows too much." A deafening crash of thunder drowned Laura's next words, leaving dread thick in the corridor. Emma pressed her back against the cold stone wall, breathing shallowly. Jacob Miller paced like a caged animal, his voice sharp with desperation. Jacob said, "We need proof, something they can't bury." Emma whispered, "The proof died with him." Laura Bennett stepped forward cautiously, lowering her voice. "There's someone else who knows." Detective Mark Riley cut in sharply, "You're assuming this person can be trusted." Rain pounded the windows as a shadow flickered outside. Emma caught a glimpse of Vivian Cross's silhouette before it vanished into the storm, leaving an icy dread in its wake. Mark Riley gripped his phone tightly, the blue glow of an encrypted message reflecting in his tense eyes. Mark said, "They know we're here. They want us silenced." Emma Hayes whispered urgently, "Who sent it?" Laura Bennett's face drained of color as she said, "It came from inside the courtroom." Jacob Miller slammed his fist against the wall, shouting, "Then we've been betrayed." Mark's voice turned steely. "We leave now, or we won't live to see sunrise." A loud crash echoed down the hall, freezing every breath in their throats. The group turned toward the echoing noise, their bodies taut with fear. Emma Hayes whispered, "What was that?" Mark Riley motioned for silence, his steps slow and deliberate. Jacob Miller muttered, "We need to get out now." Laura Bennett clutched Emma's arm, her breath shaky. A dark figure appeared at the corridor's end before vanishing into the storm outside. Vivian Cross's cold voice drifted through the air. Some truths should stay buried. Emma felt her heart lurch as she realized the fight had only begun, and the storm within these walls was far more dangerous than the one outside. The rain had finally slowed by morning, leaving the courthouse district washed clean but eerily silent. Emma Hayes sat alone on a worn bench in a small cafe, staring into a cup of untouched coffee as Jacob Miller entered with cautious steps. Jacob said, "We need to plan our next move before they do." Emma didn't look up, whispering, "I don't even know who to trust anymore." Laura Bennett arrived moments later, her presence soft but commanding as she said, "You can trust me, Emma. You always could." Emma's hands trembled as she asked, "Can I?" Detective Mark Riley walked in, glancing over his shoulder before speaking. Mark said, "Someone followed me here. We don't have much time." Emma's chest tightened as she realized their circle was shrinking and the walls were closing in around them. Jacob Miller leaned over the table, his voice low and urgent. Jacob said, "Vivian Cross was at the courthouse last night. She doesn't just watch for sport." Emma Hayes narrowed her eyes, murmuring, "She knows more than she lets on." Laura Bennett reached across the table, resting her hand gently on Emma's, her tone soft. Laura said, "Emma, you have to trust someone, and right now that should be me." Emma pulled her hand back, whispering, "Trust nearly killed me once." Mark Riley glanced at the window, spotting a figure lingering in the fog. Mark said, "We're being watched. We need to leave now." Emma's pulse raced as she followed his gaze, knowing danger was closing in. Outside, the group moved quickly through narrow side streets slick with rain. Emma Hayes kept her head down, her voice barely audible. Emma said, "Why is Vivian Cross doing this?" Jacob Miller muttered, "Because power isn't enough for her, she needs control." Laura Bennett struggled to keep pace, whispering, "She's always been calculating, but this feels personal." Mark Riley led the way, scanning alleys, his hand near his concealed weapon. Mark said, "Stay close, don't speak, and don't stop moving." A sudden noise behind them made Emma spin, catching a glimpse of a young figure darting into the shadows. Emma gasped, "Who was that?" Jacob growled, "Someone who knows too much." The group reached an abandoned warehouse on the edge of town, its broken windows rattling in the wind. Mark Riley forced the door open, whispering, "Inside quickly." Emma Hayes hesitated, scanning the darkness before stepping in. Jacob Miller kept close behind her, muttering, "This place gives me the creeps." Laura Bennett placed a hand on his arm, saying softly, "It's safe enough for now." A sudden voice rang out from the shadows, sharp and defiant. The reluctant fire starter said, "You shouldn't have come here." Emma's heart skipped as she recognized the voice, one connected to a past she had tried to forget. Emma said, "Why are you here?" The answer would change everything. The reluctant fire starter stepped into the light, her hands clenched. She said, "Vivian Cross killed the only person who could stop her." Emma Hayes staggered back, whispering, "You're lying." Jacob Miller's voice boomed, "Who are you to accuse her?" The young girl snapped, "The one who saw it happen." Laura Bennett gasped, clutching her chest as realization dawned. Mark Riley growled, "If that's true, you're in danger just for speaking it." Emma's eyes filled with tears as she said, "Tell me everything." The reluctant fire starter locked eyes with Emma, her voice trembling. She said, "The truth about Vivian isn't what you think. And neither is the truth about you." Emma Hayes stood frozen in the warehouse, the weight of the reluctant fire starter's words sinking in like a stone. Jacob Miller paced, his boots crunching on broken glass, muttering, "This makes no sense." Laura Bennett's voice cracked as she whispered, "If she saw Vivian Cross kill someone, that means Adrian Cole's acquittal was orchestrated." Mark Riley clenched his jaw, his tone urgent, "This changes everything. We need hard evidence, not just a story." The reluctant fire starter stepped closer, defiant. She said, "I have proof, but Vivian's people are hunting me." Emma's breath quickened as she asked, "What kind of proof?" Outside, the rain started again, drumming against the metal roof like a countdown to disaster. Mark Riley led the group into a back room, dimly lit and damp. Mark said, "This is where we talk without being overheard." The reluctant fire starter pulled a crumpled envelope from her pocket, hands trembling. She said, "Vivian Cross doesn't just control the trial. She controls the evidence itself." Emma Hayes stared, whispering, "You mean the court documents were altered?" Jacob Miller slammed his hand on a table, furious. Jacob said, "She's rewriting history in her favor." Laura Bennett's voice wavered. "How can anyone fight that kind of power?" Mark's expression darkened as he said, "We expose her, but we need to be smarter than she is." Jacob Miller snatched the envelope and tore it open, his eyes widening as he scanned the contents. Jacob said, "These files, they show the original testimony, the one that vanished." Emma Hayes felt her knees weaken. Emma said, "This proves Adrian Cole was never supposed to walk free." Laura Bennett clutched Emma's shoulder, whispering, "Vivian Cross must have someone on the inside, maybe Judge Porter." Mark Riley frowned deeply, muttering, "That would explain why evidence disappears before trial." The reluctant fire starter's voice rose, "Vivian has more than one ally. She's everywhere." Thunder cracked outside, rattling the broken windows like a warning of what was to come. Emma Hayes backed away, overwhelmed. Emma said, "If Vivian Cross is controlling everything, we don't stand a chance." Jacob Miller's voice was fierce. Jacob said, "We fight back anyway." Laura Bennett pleaded, "If we go after her, we all become targets." Mark Riley turned sharply, his tone cold. Mark said, "We're already targets." The reluctant Firestarter stepped between them, raising her voice. She said, "You don't get it. Vivian has someone close to you feeding her information." Silence fell, each person glancing at one another with suspicion. Emma's heart raced as she realized their enemy might be one of them. The group moved to leave, urgency fueling every step. Mark Riley said, "We'll hide the files and regroup at nightfall." As they exited, a black SUV screeched to a stop outside. Jacob Miller shouted, "They found us!" Emma Hayes grabbed Laura Bennett's arm, pulling her toward the back exit. Emma yelled, "Go, now!" The reluctant Firestarter bolted ahead, ducking behind rusted crates. Vivian Cross stepped out of the SUV, her voice smooth and chilling. Vivian said, "Running only makes you look guilty." Mark drew his weapon, shouting, "Get back inside." Chaos erupted as the storm outside merged with the storm within. The storm outside roared louder as Emma Hayes and Jacob Miller slammed the heavy warehouse door shut behind them. Laura Bennett collapsed against the wall, gasping for breath. Mark Riley checked his weapon, his face pale but composed. Mark said, "We barely got out alive." The reluctant Firestarter emerged from behind a crate, clutching the envelope tightly. She said, "Vivian Cross didn't come here to scare us. She came to end this." Emma's voice trembled. "Then why let us live?" The young girl whispered, "Because she already has someone on the inside." Jacob's fists clenched as he snarled, "Who?" The silence that followed was heavier than the storm itself, as suspicion filled the room like smoke. Emma Hayes stepped forward, her voice breaking. Emma said, "Tell me who Vivian Cross is controlling." The reluctant Firestarter hesitated, eyes darting to Mark Riley and Jacob Miller. Laura Bennett's hands shook as she whispered, "Please, just say it." The young girl finally shouted, "It's someone you trust most." Emma staggered back, heart pounding. Jacob snapped, "You're lying." Mark's jaw tightened, his eyes narrowing as he said, "No, she's not lying." Emma looked from one friend to another, realization dawning that one of them had betrayed her. Outside, lightning lit the night like a flashbulb, exposing every hidden truth. Jacob Miller's voice roared over the storm. Jacob said, "You think one of us is working for Vivian Cross? That's insane." The reluctant Firestarter's voice shook with fury. She said, "I saw someone leave her office the night the evidence vanished." Emma Hayes demanded, "Who was it?" The young girl's lips trembled as she answered, "Mark Riley." Silence fell. Mark's face darkened as he shouted, "That's a lie." Laura Bennett sobbed, clutching Emma. Emma whispered, "Mark, tell me she's wrong." Mark's voice faltered as he said, "I did what I had to do, to protect us." Outside, the rain turned into a torrential downpour as the truth ripped through the room. Emma Hayes screamed, her voice cracking under the weight of betrayal. Emma said, "You were supposed to protect us, Mark." Mark Riley shouted back, "I protected you by giving Vivian just enough to keep her from killing us all." Jacob Miller lunged, rage boiling over, but Laura Bennett stepped between them, crying, "Stop this, you're tearing each other apart." The reluctant Firestarter's voice cut through the chaos. She said, "While you fight, Vivian wins." Emma's tears blurred her vision as she realized this wasn't just about trust, but survival. Outside, a siren wailed faintly, growing louder, signaling that time was running out. The warehouse door burst open, and Vivian Cross entered with chilling calm, her silhouette framed by flashing siren lights. Vivian said, "I warned you all. Some truths should stay buried." Emma Hayes backed away, trembling. Emma shouted, "You destroyed lives for power." Vivian's lips curved into a cold smile. Vivian said, "I merely shaped the truth to fit reality." Jacob Miller raised a metal pipe, ready to fight, but Mark Riley stepped in front of him. Mark said, "If anyone dies here, it ends with me." Laura Bennett whispered, "Emma, what do we do?" Emma's voice broke as she said, "We end this. Tonight." The storm raged as Emma Hayes faced Vivian Cross, heart pounding like a war drum. Jacob Miller tightened his grip on the metal pipe, his breath ragged with fury. Laura Bennett huddled near the wall, whispering frantic prayers. The reluctant fire starter stood near Emma, her eyes wide with fear but blazing with defiance. Vivian's cold voice sliced through the chaos. Vivian said, "You think truth will save you, but truth belongs to those who control it." Mark Riley stepped between them, his voice shaking. Mark said, "It ends tonight, Vivian." Emma shouted, "You ruined lives, you twisted justice, and you won't walk away this time." Lightning flashed, illuminating the room, as a battle for the soul of the trial began. Jacob Miller lunged toward Vivian Cross with a roar, swinging the pipe. Vivian sidestepped gracefully, her voice cold. Vivian said, "Violence only proves your guilt." Mark Riley grabbed Jacob's arm, shouting, "Don't!" Emma Hayes cried out, "Jacob, stop!" Laura Bennett screamed, covering her ears. The reluctant firestarter yelled, "She's stalling us!" Emma's gaze swept the room, realizing too late that Vivian's men were approaching from the shadows. Emma screamed, "Behind you!" Chaos erupted as figures surged through the doorway, their boots pounding on wet concrete like war drums. Gunfire erupted, echoing off the warehouse walls. Mark Riley tackled Emma Hayes to the ground as bullets splintered wood above them. Emma gasped, "Mark, you said you weren't with her." Mark shouted, "I'm not, I'm with you." Jacob Miller charged forward, swinging wildly, while the reluctant firestarter grabbed Laura Bennett and pulled her to cover. Vivian Cross watched calmly, untouched by the chaos. Vivian said, "This is what truth looks like when it shatters." Emma's rage built as she crawled toward the scattered evidence, desperate to keep it from being destroyed. Emma Hayes reached the envelope, her fingers trembling as she clutched the evidence. Emma shouted, "We can still prove the truth." Vivian Cross advanced slowly, her voice a blade of ice. Vivian said, "Truth doesn't matter when the world believes my lies." Mark Riley turned, raising his weapon toward Vivian. Mark yelled, "This ends now." Vivian smirked, whispering, "You don't have the courage." Jacob Miller tackled one of Vivian's men as Emma rose to her feet, holding the evidence high. Laura Bennett sobbed, "Emma, please don't." The reluctant firestarter screamed, "Do it, Emma!" as thunder roared overhead. Vivian Cross lunged toward Emma Hayes, but Mark Riley fired a shot that rang like thunder. Vivian froze, her elegant coat blooming crimson. She fell to her knees whispering, "You can't win." Emma screamed, rushing forward as Vivian collapsed. Jacob Miller staggered back, stunned by the sight. Laura Bennett clung to Emma, crying uncontrollably. The reluctant firestarter dropped to her knees, shaking. Mark's voice was hollow as he said, "It's over, but at what cost?" Outside, the storm began to break, the first fragile hint of dawn creeping through shattered windows as silence fell over the battlefield. The storm had passed, leaving the warehouse in eerie silence as morning light filtered through shattered windows. Emma Hayes knelt beside Vivian Cross's lifeless body, her hands trembling. Jacob Miller stood nearby, his face pale, breathing heavily. Laura Bennett sobbed softly, clutching Emma's shoulder. The reluctant firestarter sat against a wall, hugging her knees, unable to speak. Mark Riley holstered his weapon, his voice hoarse as he said, "It's done." Emma whispered, "No, it's not done. Vivian may be gone, but her lies live on." Jacob muttered, "Then we burn every lie to the ground." Emma's tear-streaked face lifted toward the sunlight, silently vowing to finish what had begun. Outside the warehouse, police sirens wailed as officers swarmed the scene. Emma Hayes clutched the envelope of evidence tightly, refusing to let it go. Mark Riley walked beside her, speaking quietly. Mark said, "If we hand it over, They'll bury it like before. Emma's voice was sharp. Emma said, then we don't hand it over. We release it ourselves. Jacob Miller glanced warily at the approaching officers. Jacob said, we'll be hunted for this. Laura Bennett whispered, we already are. The reluctant firestarter looked up with newfound resolve, saying, if Vivian's gone, someone has to tell the world the truth. Emma nodded, knowing the fight wasn't over, only changing shape. The group retreated to a small hidden safe house on the city's edge. Emma Hayes spread the documents across an old wooden table, scanning them by lantern light. Emma said, these files name every person Vivian controlled. Jacob Miller leaned over her shoulder, muttering, Judge Porter's name is here. Laura Bennett covered her mouth in shock. Laura said, he let Adrian Cole walk free, on purpose. Mark Riley's voice was bitter. Mark said, Vivian wasn't the only one pulling strings. The reluctant firestarter pointed to a photo, whispering, this person, they're still out there. Emma stared at the evidence, realizing their enemy wasn't gone, only hiding deeper. Emma Hayes sat apart from the group, clutching a weathered photograph of a young woman whose smile seemed frozen in time. Laura Bennett approached quietly, sitting beside her. Laura said, is that her? Emma's voice cracked. Emma said, my sister, the reason I started this fight. Jacob Miller watched from across the room, his face softening. Jacob said, Vivian kept her disappearance a weapon against you. Mark Riley added grimly, and she used it to control everyone else. The reluctant firestarter whispered, we need to make her memory mean something. Emma wiped her tears, whispering, we will, I promise. As dawn fully broke, Emma Hayes stood outside the safe house, breathing in the cold morning air. Mark Riley joined her silently, his face lined with guilt. Mark said, I never wanted to betray you. Emma replied, but you did, and now you have to live with it. Jacob Miller emerged, holding a small bag of supplies. Jacob said, we need to move before they trace us here. Laura Bennett appeared with the reluctant firestarter, both visibly frightened but determined. Emma looked at them all and said, this isn't the end, it's just the next chapter. Behind them, the city's skyline glowed with the fragile light of a new day, holding both hope and danger. The sun had barely risen as Emma Hayes walked alone down a quiet city street, her coat clinging to her from the damp morning air. Jacob Miller trailed several steps behind, watchful and silent. Emma's grip tightened on the envelope of evidence, her face pale with exhaustion. Laura Bennett waited near a parked car, her nervous hands twisting together. Mark Riley stood apart from them all, his eyes shadowed by regret. The reluctant firestarter perched on the curb, drawing shapes in the dirt with a broken stick. Emma whispered, this is bigger than all of us. Jacob said, then we face it together. The words felt fragile, like glass ready to shatter. Emma Hayes opened the car door and held the envelope high for everyone to see. Emma said, once this is released, there's no turning back. Laura Bennett's voice quivered. Laura said, we'll be hunted forever. Jacob Miller clenched his fists. Jacob said, better hunted than silent. Mark Riley lowered his head, whispering, they'll come for me first. The reluctant firestarter looked up with sharp defiance. She said, let them. Vivian Cross's empire dies with her lies. Emma's eyes burned with resolve, knowing this final choice would define them all. The group gathered close as Emma Hayes slid the envelope into a metal lockbox hidden beneath the car's floor panel. Mark Riley said, once we send this, there's no controlling what happens next. Jacob Miller growled, good. Let the world see who really holds power. Laura Bennett whispered, and if they twist it again? The reluctant firestarter answered, her voice steady, then we fight again. Emma closed the panel with finality, her heart pounding as sirens wailed faintly in the distance. The war wasn't over. It was only beginning. As they prepared to leave, a figure emerged from the mist down the street. Emma Hayes froze, her breath caught in her throat. Laura Bennett gasped. Who is that? Mark Riley's hand moved instinctively to his sidearm. Jacob Miller stepped forward, calling out, "Stay where you are." The reluctant firestarter's voice trembled. It's not possible." The figure came closer, revealing a familiar face. The young woman from Emma's photograph, the lingering memory thought lost forever. Emma's knees buckled as she whispered, "Sophie?" The figure simply smiled, silent and haunting. Emma Hayes stumbled forward, tears streaming down her face. Emma said, "Sophie, you're alive?" The lingering memory remained silent, her enigmatic smile deepening. Jacob Miller whispered, "Is this real?" Laura Bennett clutched Emma, sobbing, "We need to go." Mark Riley's voice was urgent. Mark said, "This changes everything. We don't know what's true anymore." The reluctant firestarter whispered, "Or who to trust." Sophie finally spoke, her voice soft and chilling. Sophie said, "The truth is never what you think." As the group froze in stunned silence, the camera lingered on Emma's face, the future uncertain, the storm far from over.